Hey friends, it's Perseus Paints, and today I'm going to walk you through how I went from this to this. So I start out with a rough sketch. I'm never 100% sure how I want a painting to look when I'm finished with it, but I always have a general idea of what the subject will be like to start. Originally, I wanted to continue with the playing card motif that I had in my previous video, of the man representing the spade suit in a deck of cards, and as you can see, started working on the diamond suit. But in the end, I wanted my character to look more dynamic. And I had the idea of making a magical girl with like a wand. After I have a rough sketch laid out, I'll clean it up just a little bit more and tweak the anatomy a bit before drawing my more finalized line art. To paint my line art, I lowered the opacity of my rough sketch, overlaid a second layer on top, and make a cleaner version of the sketch. I don't trace the first layer. Instead, I still keep my line art pretty loose and fluid to capture the movement and the personality of the sketch. I think capturing the emotion of what you sketched at first is equally as important, if not more so, than the accuracy. And the reason why I keep things pretty loose and fluid for now is because as you can start to lay down the colors, the shadows, and the highlights, your paintings will eventually come together and tighten up, as I call it. If you start off stiff, you'll end up with an even stiffer painting. Even during this time, you can see that the finalized line art that I do isn't true to the sketch at the bottom, where I just mess around with her hair and try to really figure out the forms that I want to convey. When coloring the painting, I create a new layer beneath my line art and lay down my flat or base colors. For this painting, I wanted her hair to be a little green because I wanted it to stand out and be different from its surroundings. But at the same time, I didn't want to make the whole painting too bright and cartoony. I wanted the colors to be more neutral, and just wanted to subtly add a little more interest to the piece by making her hair green and her eyes purplish. But as you can see, both colors are still pretty neutral to match the rest of the flats that I chose. When rendering the colors, I like to lower the opacity of my line art layer and either paint my shadows and highlights on my flats layer or create another layer on top of the line art layer. I think once we reach this stage, you start to breathe a little bit more life into your character. It's usually during this time when you can kind of look at the painting and ask yourself if you want to continue the painting or scrap it and move on. I call this part of the process the ugly stage of painting. I found though that if you keep pushing and just keep rendering and re-rendering the painting over, things start to come together, and that's how I felt in this stage of painting her face. I started to see the forms that I wanted. Every now and then I adjust the anatomy, like making the head smaller or the neck a little thinner. I have the tendency to keep going over and over the same spots, and I really want to learn how to be more efficient and mindful with my brush strokes, so I don't keep undoing and redoing my work. I keep doing this process of reworking and repainting, and eventually you reach a point where you no longer need to rely on the line art, and you can use shadows and values to define your form. If you notice, I actually erased the sketch of the head and started just working on the colored layer. You can see that I like to work from lighter, less saturated colors and build up to the darker, more saturated ones. Eventually you reach a point where you leave the ugly face. Even if looking at it, it still kind of looks the same now that I'm looking back. But I remember when you're actually in the painting, things are always a little bit chunkier and fuzzier and less defined when you're actually working on it. And then looking back, you're like, oh, I don't actually see that ugly face, but I promise it's there. So eventually you reach a point where you leave that ugly phase, and this is the part of the painting I really enjoy because you have momentum and you're no longer feeling blindly throughout the painting trying to find the forms and establish the colors, which is what I really felt while working on her face. Something that I also think is a good tip, which is something that I learned from the YouTuber that I used to watch a lot when I was younger. His name I think is Mark Brunet. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name properly, but he has a channel called Cube Brush and I watched that a lot as a child. And I think now he started this YouTube art school, which I think is pretty cool. So something that he said is to not be afraid of painting over your current painting, because sometimes you find that you can add more interesting details. This is always my least favorite part of the painting. It's painting everything aside from the face. As you can tell, I really love painting faces, but when it comes to painting everything else, like the hands, the shirt, I still struggle with wrinkles and I'm trying to work on wrinkles more. A part of me dreads doing it because it doesn't feel as expressive or as artistic as drawing the face. Even though I know you can convey a lot of stories with clothes, I really want to just not necessarily, I mean, you can always improve. Like, my goal isn't necessarily to get better, but I guess my personal goal when drawing things aside from the face is to enjoy it more. Because I think when you enjoy painting something more, you're just more likely to spend more time on it, spend a little bit more effort into it. And so I really just want to learn how to enjoy painting this part. Here I just decided to put in a little bit of a detail with a little neck ribbon, I guess. And harkening back to what I said before about not being afraid to paint over your current painting. For example, here I drew a little cat on her shoulder because I just thought she needed a sidekick, and there was some empty space there that I kind of wanted to fill up. And I thought that adding a little cat would kind of add to the subtle magical element of the painting. At this point, I didn't really explain this verbally, but it started out as wanting to continue with the diamond suit in a deck of cards, and then slowly transitioned into a magical girl. And it was during this time that I was like, you know what, I don't want it to be overtly quote unquote magical. I think I kind of want to make it a little bit more subtle. Like that was starting to kind of like, that was a thought that was starting to creep up in the back of my mind, that I didn't want it to be like an overt like little magical girl, but I wanted it to be a little bit more like hinted at and more whimsical, I guess. However, despite saying not to be afraid of painting over your original painting, I can also understand the anxiety of messing up the layer that you work so hard on. So this is just a tip that I have. I cheat. Sometimes I'll duplicate the layer that I'm working on and then hide the first layer, and then just do all of the adjustments on that duplicated layer to see if I like the changes. If I don't like them, I just scrap the second layer. If I like the changes that I make, I just keep the layer. So at this point, I'm just messing around with a cat. I'm not really used to drawing animals. I think the reason why I decided to add a cat is because I started watching Sailor Moon. And you know, there's this little cat, and so that definitely gave some inspiration for the little kitty hanging from her shoulder. So here I started messing around with her eyes and tried to think about how I wanted it to look more cutesy and more anime-like. And I don't know, I always struggle with the highlights of the eyes for some reason. Like, it just looks too glassy. It doesn't have that dream-like ethereal effect that I see other artists have, and I really want to learn how to mimic that. But whenever I try to put a highlight in someone's eye, I just think it ends up making them look a little dead, which is not exactly the vibe that we're going for. And of course, the ever real struggle of working with the wrinkles of the shirt. I remember watching a YouTube video about drawing wrinkles on shirts, and what they suggested was to really think about the tension points and where your subject is tugging on the fabric, and that'll help dictate how it's going to drape on the person's body. But even then, like, the human body is so complex, and there are different fabric thicknesses, fabric textures, that sometimes I still get confused. Well, actually, I still get confused a lot, and kind of just like think about what looks good, I guess, when I'm painting. Like, that's the thing. I don't really paint off of rules when painting fabrics. I kind of just feel around and think about what seems right, which I kind of want to be a little bit more technical about. And the same thing goes for drawing hands too. Like, I'm not very technical when I draw hands. I kind of go more off of what looks right. But then again, that can backfire, because if you're not 100% sure what's right, if you don't have the basics, then how are you going to be able to objectively determine if something is correct or not? So my main takeaway for this was hands and shirts. I need to work on it a little more. And here I decided to just go with a different kind of highlight and just use a different color to bring that highlight to her eyes, because I don't know, it just breathes a little more life into her eyes without it looking glassy. Here I'm just starting to paint in the background. I still struggle with painting the backgrounds. I think I just enjoy drawing characters so much that I kind of just forget about background and environment, which is not exactly the best thing, because your environment can add so much to the mood of your painting. Like, there are a lot of artists out there who just really know how to capture a good environment and really relay the emotion in a piece. So at this point, I'm just adding the final touches to the painting and adjusting the color values. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the video and learned something new today. If this information was valuable to you, or you'd like to see more content like this, please like this video to let me know, and subscribe to my channel for more. See you all soon. Bye.